And here we are again. Good morning to South Africa.
Greetings from South Africa across some landmass and some ocean in between. How's it going in Germany today?
It's good, it's raining. Shit. And it's Farmers Market Friday, which is always good. I love your
Yeah,
hat today.
yeah, something a little different, Jens. I've been doing some thinking this week, and it's also one of the topics that we're going to chat about today. But sometimes I think we can get caught up in doing many things the same, and I think we've been doing these live sessions for the last couple of weeks, and I'm not a big fan. I don't have a massive wardrobe. I've never been someone to sort of have a huge amount of clothes inside of my wardrobe, but I've always enjoyed different hats and things like that, and so I thought I'd mix it up today, and give those watching and those who watch the recording maybe a little laugh seeing someone wear a bucket hat inside of a room. They must think I'm quite mad, but anyway, we've all got some craziness inside of us somewhere.
Yeah, I love that. We should do more of that. And that's why I'm wearing blue today. No. It's just that like I said before we started recording and joking, like I don't want to only wear black polo shirts because it's like live show number 5 and all 4 before I was wearing a black polo shirt. Though that there are different polo shirts, but nobody sees that. That hey, this logo is a different one, just looks the same.
Yeah, man, but there's lots of stuff inside of that, and even if we just think about what that means in terms of doing things differently, and we've chatted about it in a different show where we just spoke about designing things with intention. And I remember you referring to your watch strap and how you intentionally wear a blue watch strap and things like that. And
Right
I wore
here.
this hat in a there it is. See, it's matching colors today. But I wore this hat in a different conversation, and I was standing outside, and they were like, geez, where are you? And it's immediately just like a conversation starter. And I think sometimes in this digital world that we're in, we can forget how little tweaks or, background colors or changing your Zoom background and things like that can, just add a different dimension to the call that we're on.
Yeah, and on top of that, like if we talk business, it's all too serious. Like it's all bottomed up. It's still like, yeah, you're not serious if you're wearing a cap. You have no idea. And I've had an amazing conversation this week in one of the live shows. I have had the possibility to interview a Hollywood movie director who has won an Oscar, and he's he's such an amazing person. So if you think like Hollywood movie directors, they have the best setup and everything is lighting and camera. He just gives a fuck. He's he's just yeah. I just use my normal camera from the laptop and it works, and I love that. I mean, it's maybe different if you are already on top of your game or like I think he's in his 60s, but I just
Mm.
love that where it's more about he works with the top of the top in the whole world in the movie industry and as well from an executive perspective and politicians, but it's not about hey, I don't need to show up anymore. It doesn't matter. Like I am who I am, and if you don't like it, not my problem. And I
Mm.
think we need to do more of that um, early on. I mean, I have been in the corporate game for almost too long, um, and you comply with the like the rules. And I think we need to do more about. Yeah, I get that you need to comply to certain rules, but do you really need to wear a tie in a bank? Does it really makes you more serious if you wear a tie or a suit in a bank, which nobody sees? It's just internal. I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, we'll definitely have to take that discussion a bit further and unpick it and take it apart a bit, because I think that there are two sides to every coin, and I
Yeah.
think some people will say that that there's certain things that come up with that status, in terms of how you dress and things like that, and a lot of people will not allow you into. I've got a friend who works in a big corporate finance position, and I won't be allowed into their offices looking like this, but that's one of those things. And so yeah, anyway. Jens, that's a good intro, and I really enjoy these live sessions. So thanks again for making time, and thanks for those who are tuning in to another Reverse Mentor Friday session. And as per sort of a tradition now, we've spitballed the topic and pulled a few things together to give us something to really dig into today. And so that topic is what needs to change in the world to promote cross-generational learning.
Hmm.
And I think it's quite interesting that we started off talking about change and doing things differently, wearing different hats, and what is the associated work attire that you wear when you go into the office or you go into work in a big corporation. So Jens, maybe to kick us off, what do you think needs to change in order to promote cross-generational learning?
A lot. Yeah, yeah. I think there are different perspectives. So let's start with very large companies. Like very large for me is like very large is 100,000 plus employees. That's the world where I've been working in for quite some time. To change it there, and taking maybe as well what Barnett said on Wednesday on the live show, is you need to change from the top, which means he was explaining it in a very interesting way that the CEO needs to understand how he or she communicates, and then how he or she listens, and that will impact the whole company. And I think that's, if we talk about the big companies, you need to start from that level and looking into, okay, how do we want to communicate to enable cross generational exchange and learning inside the organization? Which means, first of all, the CEO needs to understand, the supervisory needs to understand why is that important. If we then go into smaller companies, let's say a couple of hundreds to a couple of thousand employees, I think it's still valid that the CEO, but then it's more about the total executive team, which needs to happen in the big ones as well. But the big ones need definitely to start with the CEO and getting it into the executive team. In the smaller organizations, let's say hundreds to 5,000 employees, then it's more the executive team members, or one of the executive team members can bring it in and really get into that, and exploring and bringing it into the conversation of the executive team. And then in the smaller ones, let's say below 100, it's not just the executive, it's literally everyone can bring that in and everyone can bring that forward. That doesn't mean in the bigger ones it's not possible that a young person is saying, hey, we should do this, and I approach the CEO. But it's more about a starting point to get a conversation flowing, get a conversation around this topic into the organization. So that's, as a first starting point, first step, I think it's understanding the why, and then having a conversation and looking into how to communicate it into the total organization. What about you? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a great starting point. And I think starting with people, as we've discussed in previous episodes and previous shows, is super important. And especially with starting with understanding the why and asking yourself why, and why is it important, and how am I going to enable that, I think is a big thing in terms of what needs to change. But when I've started thinking about this, and I've been spending a lot of time thinking about Web3 and crypto and the way that things are structured and things like that, and it really goes back to what I call sort of the plumbing of everything. So how are things constructed? And I've come back to this premise of, we need to be aware of the interactions and the interconnectedness of things. And I think if you wind the clock back 24 months, and we were discussing this before we went live, around how businesses got exposed by their lack of preparedness for changing situations to do with COVID.
Yeah.
And I think the simple premise from my side of what needs to change is that we need to be way more aware of the interconnectedness of things. So simplistically, that means that if you are a CEO or senior executive inside an organization, are you aware of how the graduate program works? That does not mean, and I'm not saying that you need to go and run it. And I was in a meeting yesterday where there was a misunderstanding, partly language barriers, but in the sense of also you had a senior executive talking to someone who is now managing a team. And the senior executive said, hey, I need you to go and make sure that this is happening. And the person that was managing the team assumed that meant, hey, that I actually needed to go and get hands-on and go and do the actual task.
Yeah.
And that's what wasn't being meant at all. That was saying, hey, you need to actually go and push that button, or make sure that this person inside of that team is doing that. And Jens, that ties into sort of your differentiation between management and leadership.
Yeah.
And that example for me makes it super clear in terms of the importance of actually understanding what is going on. And if you use the example that we were joking about, around people wearing different work attire, whether that be suits, formal dresses or things like that, that doesn't necessarily detract from the type of work that is happening.
Sure.
And how are you aware of that? Are you in tune with it? And all of those things. So that is a very high level, and some of the thoughts that have been bouncing around in my head when we pulled this topic together earlier in the week.
Yeah. Love that. One of the conversations I've had this week was on resilience. Resilience. That's something else. Resilience. And I mean, we always say that future fitting an organization means that the leaders of today learn from the leaders of tomorrow, and you have this generational exchange. That's what we stand for. That's what we believe in, and I think that's, if we look into the future, if you want to build an organization that is ready to take on another pandemic, and I was talking about that in the live show on Tuesday. I'm wrapping up my live shows here. And Pim was saying that in a very interesting way on how he would engage with an organization to do that. And he was literally talking about, so he would put the team together, and if we take this now into our context, putting a team together that's experienced thinkers and young thinkers to talk about, so what experience do we want to have? With the perspective of, hey, what's the future going to be? But what experience, how do we want to enjoy the way we work together? So it's completely, if you come from my world, that's not happening. That's counterintuitive to say, hey, let's sit together, and before we put any goals together, let's talk what experience we would love to have together.
Yeah.
And I like that very much, because it's completely changing the way you think, because you focus on the people, like you said, and you focus on, hey, let's understand each other first, let's get to know each other first, let's understand of the experience and how we want to get, what we want to get out of it as an individual person, and then you go into, okay, what do we want to achieve as the totality? Quite interesting way of thinking. I've never thought about it in that way.
Yeah, it sort of aligns with that saying of bottom up. So
Yeah.
you're approaching it from the bottom up, and you're working together to produce an outcome. And so that's got a lot of the way of thinking. So there's a person by the name of Jane Jacobs, and she wrote some fantastic books around how great American cities were influenced and created by people aggregating, coming together, coordination, all of those types of things. And while you were talking, Jens, I was reminded of a post that I was reading this morning titled "Legitimacy Lost," and it was written in a dual author, so Lynn Legion and Katie Parrott. And Legion has done some phenomenal work around the creator economy. And while you're talking and thinking about people, and it sort of reminded me of this post in two parts. Firstly, because inside of the post, she's basically talking about how the platforms that a lot of people and creators specifically use today, they are sort of beholden to the methodology and the mechanics of the platform. So if you take YouTube, for example, and you're a creator, you can have your revenue streams quite simply turned on or turned off, depending on whatever that platform decides. And now you're thinking about how this example that you gave of preparing for another pandemic is, how are we preparing for what the future may hold, and what needs to change in the way that we interact as people to allow us to enable and unlock cross-generational learning. And if we bring that back into our context now from a reverse mentorship perspective, we're saying that there's certain things that you need to understand in terms of how people interact, also why people are interacting in that specific way, and then where do these interactions happen.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest things is, we've been in a lot of conversations in the last sort of couple of months, is people know that maybe cross-generational interactions need to happen, but being physically distanced, because we're still dealing with this pandemic, or now dealing with fully remote teams. So you're dealing with people sitting in South Africa, people sitting in Germany, people sitting in America. How does that happen? How do I get to know Jens sitting, a good 24 hours travel via air through a 2D screen? How does Jens get to know Josh sitting in South Africa, having never met in person before? How does that all of that work? And so I think that we've got this concept of cross-generational learning, many people may say, yes, we know that it needs to happen. We
Mm.
know that we need to take that step. And we've touched on this before in other conversations about just starting. And I think that's a vital part of what needs to change. I think people just need to start, but there also needs to be a plan that's in place. And I sometimes think that we were discussing this, funnily enough, before we started recording, about sort of the back work that people don't often see. Often people see just the end result. And we spoke about it last week about seeing yourself as a product and developing and things like that. But specifically inside of what needs to change, I think people need to start, and then they need to have a plan to say, how are they going to promote cross-generational learning? And then how are they going to evaluate it as well? Because often inside big organizations, you're talking, 100,000 people plus, is that these people start things and then it's only evaluated when they're exco meetings or manco meetings, which happen. But is that the way of the future? Is that the way that organizations are going to be able to change? Or should it rather be small micro teams with inside of that, potentially harder to manage because, again, it comes down to people, but can that allow you to move faster and to benefit from some of these values that are unlocked by cross-generational learning?
Yeah. And to take that into something we also discussed before we recorded, this short-term thinking. And I was just explaining before we started recording that I was finally listening to German news this week, and like they did the forecast on the GDP and what's going on, and that it's lower than expected, all of that stuff. Same in the US right now with when you see what's happening with the distribution, like their tankers and big ships standing in front of or waiting in front of the harbors and can't get through. So the goods are there, but they're not there. They're just on the ocean still and in front of the harbor. So a lot of organizations are still zoomed into today and tomorrow. It's like, how do we fix and how do we survive in today's world? And I get that from an operational perspective of an organization. When you're squeezed over 1.5 or 2 years almost, that you need to figure out of how do we earn money right now. But I think one of the things we always discussing is how do you utilize that on splitting yourself up in a way that you say, yes, we need to do things today, but we as well need to take care of the future. So, and that's for me, this mechanism of generational exchange. And we have had a conversation a couple of weeks ago where it was about, we introduced the way of thinking of generational exchange, and the people, like you said, everyone gets it. And everyone says that's super important because we are not getting the right talents right now already, and it will be even harder in the future. But then comes the but. But let's look into how we can squeeze more out of our customers right now. How can we earn more money right now? Because we have promised it to the stakeholders, shareholders, whatever. So it's everyone is aware of it, but nobody's acting on it. Similar way of thinking on climate change. Everyone is aware of climate change, but who is really acting on it? And what did we learn from the pandemic of we're hit by a pandemic, and what's the difference there is like the whole humanity was able to get things moving fairly quickly. Everywhere in the whole world, people feel that there is something that's constraining you. People feel that there's something not working. So the pain is there. And people are acting when the pain is there. And then they're trying to find the right painkiller pills to take them as fast as possible. And then hustle to get through it. And people and there are people like the Microsoft founder Bill Gates, who has said the pandemic will come. Was it like 10 15 years ago? There are videos about that where he was saying this can happen. That's we need to invest more into research. We need to build in the resilience into organizations, into states that we are aware of. The health system needs to be prepped, and so on. So they're thinkers and who know that's going to happen. And maybe if we take the pandemic as an example, that's maybe too complex for every person inside a business to understand. But if we look into a business, and every business right now who has a couple of employees knows you will have challenges to find good employees in the future, and the future talent. Everyone knows that, but who is really acting right now before it is too late? And I think the companies who will take the steps right now and doubling down on looking into how do we build an attractive work environment for young talents, where we build an engagement between the top executives inside an organization and the people who are just joining, let's say, graduation from school, whatever level you come in. There's an engagement opportunity with the most senior staff in the organization. And if you're enable that to happen, I truly believe you will win. You will attract more talents, because the youngsters coming into an organization, let's say you're 20, 16 years old, you go into an organization and you have a, let's do something very simple, you have a breakfast with the CEO every week. If it's a small company within a physical environment, they will talk about that inside the school, inside their friendship environment. And every one of their friends will get jealous, like, holy crap, he's having breakfast with the CEO every month or every week. So everyone else will then compare their experience in their company with that example, because that's like the most perceived value. If you and that's just one very, very simple example. If you do this strategically as an organization, to, hey, we do this as a strategy to create engagement between young thinkers and experienced thinkers, you will win. It's just to that point, what I just mentioned is, if you don't feel the pain right now, why should I do this? Because I just try to get more money right now, because we are coming out of a pandemic, or are still inside a pandemic. And this so fascinating. We have had this conversation with even potential clients of ours, who they say they get it, but they're not taking action right now because it's not painful enough. How do we change as humanity and saying, yes, we need to do something, and that can be climate change, that can be the example we just said, but we do it right now and we get things moving, and we try to focus on being ahead of the curve. Same with Web 3.0. How can you do this right now to be ahead of the curve and learn, validate your ideas, where the whole innovation thinking comes in? Do it right now. Don't do it perfect, but get started and validate your assumptions. Do it step by step and grow into it, because then you will have the best talents in the whole world working in your company, and you can choose between the best talents if you do it smart. Long ramble.
Yeah, lots of good points here. And so I think for me, the biggest thing while you're talking is what I was thinking about is our relationship with risk, and almost saying that we need to rethink that, and we need to rethink what it means to manage risk and what it means to take risk. So from a simplistic example, you may say, what is the risk of not doing something versus what is the risk of me doing it? And if you think about this in terms of preparedness, so again, we're having this conversation prior to hitting the go live button, is around businesses that had prepared in some shape or form for a change, whether that have been COVID, whether that have been, increased digitalization, etc. They are the businesses that have been able to survive and potentially even thrive inside of a COVID economy. And if you think about what that means from a business standpoint, is those businesses were prepared to change. They were agile enough, they were adaptable enough, etc. And that was because of the systems and the structures that they had in place. And now if you say, what is the risk of me not creating an environment for cross-generational learning? The likelihood is that you're going to be caught on the back foot. You may still recover and you may still move forward, but the rate at which you can move forward and the preparedness of which you have to take on new challenges or changing environments will be dramatically decreased. And I strongly believe that in terms of the ability, if you just take the example of the shifts that are happening in technology at the moment, you bring and this is often where reverse mentorship is thought of to have a home in terms of how it's been defined and how it's been used more in a more public forum, is to help older generations understand technological change. So if we use a simple example of social media, is, hey, how do I use social media? A lot of people, that's what people think reverse mentorship is. Reverse mentor comes in and they teach an executive about, hey, this is Facebook, this is what it does, this is how it is used. But I think that we are past that in terms of saying that actually younger generations are thinking differently about the way that they're organizing, the way that they want, and what the future is that they want to create. They don't necessarily want to use the rails or the systems that have got us to this point. And that is a big thing, like I mentioned earlier, in terms of acknowledging this interconnectedness. And then if we acknowledge the interconnectedness, how do we then change our association with risk? So instead of saying, yes, I need to be aware of, to keep the lights on, I need to do this. I'm 100% for that. I'm an entrepreneur myself in terms of the things that we do. We're very conscious of that. But if we don't acknowledge the risks of not doing something, what does that look like in an extended time horizon?
Yeah.
And I think if we just have that awareness of it, if we push ourselves to be more aware, my hope is that then the action will follow that. Because you also have to remember that simply learning about something doesn't mean that you're going to action it. So then it's links back to maybe another rabbit hole that we'll have to go down, is around how do we take this concept of, yes, we need to change. Okay, well, what is it that we need to change, and what's next? How do businesses, and we've had discussions on that in various forums and various podcasts, but I think if we can maybe spark some action, or maybe use some of the examples that we've used on a practical level, that can also inspire people to take that leap, because it might seem like it's super scary and a lot of work, and good things are usually a lot of work, but you have to try and make it happen.
Yeah. Maybe just to double down on that, before I go into a couple of things. The hardest thing is getting to the yes, convincing yourself that today is the right time to start. The other stuff after that is easy. In almost all organizations I have been working in and with over the last 25 years. So it's really important that you understand that, but as well understand how easy it is. So if we just go into creating generational exchange in an organization, one thing is, which we have given you already today, is like the communication aspect. Start with understanding how you communicate and how you listen. And we have talked about that many times. You need to speak the same language between each other. So everyone needs to learn how, if we take experienced thinker and young thinker, how do they speak? How do they listen? And how do we get to know each other in a way? So how do you operationalize that as an organization? And that can be as easy things, which some organizations do. I've heard about it. That's why I said it, having the CEO breakfast. But is it then truly a CEO breakfast, or is he just doing it because he has to, because it was scheduled in the calendar, or she has to? So I think it's more about understanding it as a CEO or an executive team or an experienced thinker in the organization. What are the things similar to what we discussed before we recorded? It's like doing a podcast. Doing a podcast consistently is fairly easy if you know how to do this and if you commit yourself. It's the same way of thinking in this. If you say, as an organization, this is important to us as an organization, which means it is important to every single human being in the organization, that we focus on generational exchange as part of future fitting our organization, then you need to find very simple steps on a day-to-day basis that make this happen in an operational setting. If you have a team meeting, do you always have a mix of experienced thinkers and young thinkers? If you set up a project group, do you have that? Do you ensure that it's going to happen? Do you have possible training elements in your organization where young thinkers can learn how to communicate with an experienced thinkers? The other way around, the same. Do you have a training element, an opportunity for experienced thinkers to go into a safe environment to try to learn it, if they're not fine with it straight away? And that's just getting small step by step things moving, but it's grained into the habits, into the behaviors of the organization. If you operationalize it after the yes, it's going to happen.
Yeah, and a key word that you mentioned there, Jens, was ingrained. And I think if you think about change and what it means to adapt to change, if we can find small ways where we start ingraining different forms of behavior and different ways of doing things, it makes bigger change, what's so-called, in maybe in organizational terms, stepped change, it makes it easier. And when you've got small incremental changes, systemic change and step change then becomes easier in terms of shifting an organization that's 100,000 people plus, rather than just having to respond to COVID-19, where you really had no other option. You do have an option, and we do have ways to do things differently. It's all just really about getting to yes. And I love the way that you framed that. So yeah, lots of nuggets, and my head's even a bit more spinning than it was before we started recording. And I think the key is what I'm trying to do from a personal perspective, and figuring out this how from reverse mentorship, is really about breaking it down into small pieces that can be operationalized, can be tested, sort of taking that, like we've chatted before, that innovation style prototyping approach to saying, what are you testing? How do you go about testing that? How are you evaluating it? What element is it going to move forward? What is the output? And bringing it all back into it, and at the end of the day, learning from it, because we don't have all the answers. And I think that's one of the things that maybe also is what's inhibiting cross-generational learning, is people don't want to engage in it because they think, hey, there's no proven model for this. And you may be right, there's no proven model, but each organization is different. And I think that's the sooner we can start getting to grips with that, hopefully the more cross-generational learning environments will be developed to help organizations move forward.
Yeah, and maybe just to bring us home, even that I said it's very, very important that you get to the yes inside the organization, that the CEOs need to be aware of all that kind of things. It doesn't matter where so like the people who are watching right now, it doesn't matter where you are in an organization, you can start today. You can do these small things and say, hey, I am somewhere in the organization. I can be 16 years old or can be 60 years old. I can start an exchange and try it today and figure it out, and look into how I can do that on a day-to-day basis in different ways, and then infecting the others, starting a conversation around this. So don't wait until someone says yes, though that I say it's very important, but it's really just getting things moving. Starting the virus to spread in an organization will help you to get going, and that's very, very easy steps. So it's not, don't complicate things. It's getting started as an individual, find like-minded people, and then really get into that. So we have Louis, who is joining us here. So we need to get independent. Yes, thanks, Louis. And
Louis, we'll have to have a conversation about decentralization and some of the big shifts that are happening from an underlying structure perspective, and what's making that possible. But 100% agree with you. There's lots of shifts that are happening, and allowing companies and individuals even to go direct to consumer, or to decentralize their operations, to allow them to have more underlying control and more contributors at the end of the day, rather than this centralized world that we've become accustomed to living in. And I think, Jens, to sort of just round off from my side, is it's really just that, in terms of saying this concept around cross-generational learning is big, it is difficult to do, but at the end of the day, you can do things differently. And at the end of the day, you're an individual, and you've got a choice in how you go about and acting in that way, and the steps that you take. It might be challenging when you are inside 100,000 people plus organization in terms of standing out. But I'd encourage anyone that's out there that's wanting to take a bit of a change, or wanting to see what they can change in the world, to really just go about it and start.
Yeah, maybe to the comment from Louis, which he put in as well, is like, micro companies, free independents are more resilient. Agree with that. I think one of the future, maybe that's something we can talk next week about, or in one of the other sessions, is what is the future setup of an organization? Is it having 200,000 employees and they're all employed in an organization? Is it you have a completely different way where it's a lot of independent small organizations that are building a bigger organization? Whatever that is, let's figure that out. Maybe that's an interesting topic for the next time.
Yeah, there's a lot of, I came across a fascinating case study, which we won't go into now, but it was around processing health data and the amount of health data that's produced from a global standpoint. And you won't believe the numbers, but we'll leave that for another conversation, Jens. It's been super great to be back with you on Reverse Mental Lab Friday. Louis, thanks for your wonderful comments and things like that. Definitely added some elements to the mix, and we'll see you again soon.
Yes. So thank you very much for joining us today, and see you next Friday.